Hi everyone and welcome. Today I have a very special guest. I guess most of you already know him. It's Ryan Kurczak of Asheville Vedic Astrology. He is a teacher, an astrologer, an author, and he's gonna talk to us today about more of an unorthodox topic for an astrology channel. He's gonna be talking about life beyond astrology. Welcome, Ryan.
Yeah, welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah.
So I've heard that recently you're shifting your focus towards more teaching Kriya Yoga and other endeavors. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. I'm still continuing to do my astrological work. For example, the astrological apprenticeship program right now, we started year 3 of the 4-year program, and that's going really, really well. But over this past year, as I've been getting more into astrology and working with more people and as life circumstances play out, I've been driven more and more towards the idea that I think it'd be great for people to consider going beyond astrology. And like you mentioned, for an astrologer or for an astrology channel, it is kind of an unorthodox thing because, our bread and butter is come get an astrology session. And I'm thinking, no, don't get an astrology session. And it's not as cut and dry as that, because I do still obviously feel that astrology has a great place in our lives to help us work in harmony with the forces of nature in our lives, to give us deeper insights into who we are as a personality. But I've always had a bit of a difficulty with this idea of spirituality and astrology coming together, because not all the time, but for a lot of people, astrology becomes more of a distraction and sometimes a waste of time, rather than something that's actually helping them figure out who they really are. So over this past year, I've always been a meditation teacher. I've always been interested in Kriya Yoga, but this past year, I've really come to the idea that I think we need to keep astrology in its proper place. And if we are going to live our lives, we need to learn to go beyond astrology, because to define ourselves by it, that's just more of a way to limit who we are, rather than finding a way to be a free expression of this infinite consciousness or God or whatever you want to call it in this world, which I think is our ultimate goal. That's been my experience.
So you believe in free will?
What's that? Do I believe
Is
in
there,
free will?
yeah.
Yeah, I do. And that's good that you bring up that question, because I was actually contemplating this when we discussed doing this video. And so what I would like to ask you is, when you're looking at a chart and you're seeing a particular planetary combination that says maybe the person is going to have, let's just say, good relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, my question to you is, from your perspective, the theory of astrology, how did that karma get there in the first place?
Well, they did some extra good work with relationship in their past life, I guess, so now they have to burn it.
Okay. So yeah, so you just said that maybe focus on good relationships in past lifetimes created this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, that means that something in the past contributed to this positive situation right now,
Yes.
right? So why would it not also be true that if what we do right now will influence our future experience? Is that not true as well?
Yes.
So in that regard, doesn't it make sense that there is free will?
Yes, but I mean, even when we think it's free will, aren't we still going with God's plan, right? I mean, aren't we like part of something greater, and we just think we have free will, but we have like the good inspiration to do something? Or
Uh-huh. So are you saying then, if we go back to the theory of past lives,
yeah.
and and that person in the past lifetime put a lot of positive energy towards relationship, are you
Mm-hmm.
saying that wasn't a choice they made? It was just something, where does
Uh,
that come from?
yeah, it was a choice they made, but maybe it's not maybe for their better, because maybe if they had balanced their karma better, they wouldn't be reincarnated, and now they got reincarnated and have to burn all this good karma with relationships.
Well, that's true too, and that's a good point. But let's think about it this way: if we're thinking about like good and bad karma and balancing that karma, um, in a way, if we're thinking that we don't want to reincarnate anymore, is that sort of what we're getting at here? This idea of going beyond reincarnation? Okay, so if we want to go beyond reincarnation, why would we do anything in the first place? Why wouldn't we just let life happen and exhaust that karma? Why would we not do that?
I don't know how to let life happen and not do anything.
well, well, that might be the trick. That's a very good point. But and this kind of brings me back to the idea of spirituality. Like many people, as you know, for example, in the forums that we sometimes participate in, people talk about spirituality and astrology, and they talk about in a certain way as if like, if you do this certain thing, therefore this will be better or you will be uplifted. But as
Mm-hmm.
you just mentioned, if you're putting karma from past lifetimes to a good relationship, well, if you're putting karma towards having better spiritual experiences in the future, that's still something you have to reincarnate for to
Yeah.
experience,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And this is why when we get down to the bare bones of spirituality, beyond the idea of having a good life and beyond the idea of following dharmic principles, it always comes down to this idea of you are not the doer. And like in the Bhagavad Gita, one is entitled to action only, but not the fruits of their actions. So the idea is to kind of move into that place where life is happening and you are not consciously or not you are not trying to make things happen. You
Mm-hmm.
are just letting life happen. And that's why in the Yoga Sutras and many texts there's this idea of attachment and aversion.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't want to do things because we're attached to a good thing happening, because that's a type of karma that's created. But we also don't want to do things because we're afraid of bad things happening, because that's a type of karma that's created. So ultimately, the idea comes down to surrender.
Mm-hmm.
And when we can surrender into what is occurring, then we are experiencing life. We are experiencing life fully and completely right now. And by doing that, then karma is exhausting itself.
Mm-hmm.
And one example I have is when we think about astrology and what it's good um, for a lot of people, astrology is very good for distracting them from their life. And what do I mean by that? Well, a lot of people want to have good things happening all the time. But again, going back to what you're saying, if we're always wanting good things to happen all the time, we're just constantly making more karma, so we constantly have more good things to experience. But if someone is going through a really difficult period in astrology, what can astrology be useful for? Well, on one hand, it can be useful to look at the chart and say, okay, most of your life has been supportive up until now. You've hit a difficult period with your dashas or with transits or whatever it might be. And that's going to last for 6 months. And so we see that that dasha or that transit is changing in 6 months. So therefore, hopefully that will help to pacify the mind so that you can let the karma exhaust itself. That way, once the time period passes, you're back to that stable period that you tend to enjoy. But what a lot of people do when they go through a difficulty in life is they go to an astrologer, and the astrologer pulls up charts, and the astrologer says, okay, well, here's why you're going through this bad thing. And it distracts the person from actually feeling.
Experiencing it.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
From being there. Like if someone goes through the loss of a loved one, you can explain it away night and day about astrology, but that's not going to help them, because they need to be able to acknowledge, yes, this has been a painful thing, and feel it and move through it. So when they come out the other end with that karma exhausted. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, definitely, because some people come to us and they want us to be sort of like antidepressants or like painkillers, but we can't. It's like, I'm sorry, this is what it is. Just live through
Right.
it.
Right. And many people don't want to live through it. They want to look to astrology as a form of
A
escape,
band-aid.
a band-aid. Exactly.
Yeah.
So, in a way, it's not that I really feel in any way, shape, or form that we shouldn't practice astrology. My thought is that many of the people who are coming to us, they don't need astrology. What they need is a way to comfortably, or at least tolerably, embrace their life, so that when that karma comes, good or bad, they can be fully there with it. And therefore the karma expresses itself, exhausts itself, and then they can move into a freer state. That's what it all needs to come down to, I think.
Yes, you're so right, because it's like when you get sick, if you get like some anti-inflammatory or something, the sickness goes even deeper, right? So you're just fooling yourself, and then so it's like you can't cheat what's happening, like you have to experience it because it's your own luggage or whatever. So
Right.
that's very true.
Yeah, exactly.
But there's also this perspective, like very, what I don't really like to tell people like, you're never gonna do that, that's never gonna happen, even if the chart looks really bad. Like, I mean, for instance, somebody asked me the other day, oh, but because I was talking about compatibility, and they were like, oh, but if there are certain yogas in the chart, one can never have. And I'm like, okay, but like, I've never seen anything to work 100% of the time,
Right.
any yoga. And then, like, I mean, if you really want to be in a relationship, like, try to do your best to be that person that's happy in a relationship. So work on yourself first. So, but I mean, it's like, I don't like this excuse, like you hang on to astrology for an excuse for your limitation.
Right.
In a way.
Well, that's exactly right. We were talking about music a little bit before
Yeah.
we started this recording, and it's kind of like this. If someone's starting to play the guitar and they've just started, then sure, you're going to say to that person, "You're terrible at this. You don't know what you're doing. It sounds horrible. Go in the other room." And if that person hears that and all they hear is, "You're terrible at this," and they stop right there, that's like when you go to an astrologer and the astrologer says, "Look, you have this kapata yoga, or you have these yogas that are difficult, they cause problems within your life," and then they just leave you at that.
Yeah.
Whereas what we see is the way life actually happens is, yes, the person tells you, what is your experience like? You're terrible at it. So what do? Do you just accept that? No, you decide, all right, well, I'm terrible at it. So in order to, in the future, be able to play a song, to do well, to have people invite me to play music, I'm going to practice and practice and practice so that a year from now, 2 years from now, I'm actually better. So when we're thinking about going beyond astrology, it's not simply this lofty spiritual idea of just surrendering and letting life happen and that's it. That's wonderful, and I think that's very valid. But we also need to consider that when an astrologer talks to a client and that client is getting information like your sun is bad or your Venus is bad, well, let's think about that a moment. You can talk to them about that, and what is the way that they're actually going to improve that situation? They're going to improve it by asking themselves, oh, well, what are the qualities of a healthy sun?
Yeah. And how can I
And
input that into my life? How can I incorporate these actions? Exactly.
exactly, how can I act like a healthy sun?
Mm-hmm.
How can I act like a healthy Venus? Because obviously I don't know how. And so they don't need an astrologer to tell them that. In a sense, what they need is simply to think about their life and say, all right, when I consider all of the planets, because the planets are a blueprint for a healthy, successful experience in this world, not getting beyond reincarnation, just being in this world, then just simply by studying each of the planets, we are going beyond astrology, because what we are doing is we learn to embody the best of all of the planets. And then we can't control life. That's one of the things that Saturn teaches us. So one of the things that we do to embody Saturn is to realize that we just do our best. And if things fall on their face, well, that's life. We move on. But we embody all these planets. And then it doesn't matter if we go into a bad dasha. It doesn't matter if a transit causes us difficulty in our ascendant, because now all of our planets are getting stronger and stronger and stronger, which means when that planet crosses over the sensitive point by transit, you're not going to be affected by that transit as intensely. Sure, it'll still hit you on the head, but maybe it's not going to knock you out.
Yeah.
So my sense of going beyond astrology isn't just ball up astrology and forget about it. It's simply, how can we understand it in a way that allows us to live in harmony with these forces of nature in this embodied world? And in the meantime, also, how can we consider ways to go beyond it? And by letting astrology continue to distract us, that's not going to do it.
Yeah, definitely. Those are some very good points. Because even with myself, sometimes I think, oh my God, I'm gonna enter a period where my Mars has 0 Ashtaka Varga points. I wonder what that's gonna be like. But then I think about, okay, so let's see what that was like when I didn't know that my Mars had 0 Ashtaka Varga points. I'm still alive, so I guess.
Right. And that's a good point, and there's been a lot of talk about Rahu and Ketu.
Mm-hmm.
And, Rahu is the thing that we want to move to, that we want to develop.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Ketu is the sense of territory where we feel safe, where we can fall back on. But again, what is that telling you? It's just giving you more of a storyline, more of something, in a sense, you want to try to move away from Ketu, which could be a type of aversion. And Rahu, which is the thing that we think we need to develop, but there will always be something more to develop.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see what I'm saying? So no matter how much we think we understand Rahu and Ketu, at the end of the day, it's still just another thing to try to develop. So once you do it here, now what? Okay, well, now it's in your third house next time around. All right, well, now I got to develop third house things. Okay, so I follow that carrot a little bit, and I die, and I come back, and now it's in my fifth house. All right, more Rahu and Ketu to follow. So this is one of the things why, when I think about astrology, what we really need to do is see that it is a story that we are examining, but it is not something that ever ultimately is going to lead to a sense of complete freedom. Because in order to go to a place of complete freedom, we have to train ourselves to simply let go of attachment to all the things that are occurring around us, all the things that we think are so important and unimportant. And when you can exist in that space, no matter what's going on around you, that's going beyond astrology. And that's also allowing you to get to the heart of essentially what is behind astrology, I think. Or at least that's been my experience. And I would like more people to contemplate this, because the danger is, like with our current situation with like YouTube and all the blogs and the internet, is that you can find someone to support your viewpoint on anything astrological if you look hard enough.
Yeah, that's true.
So, when it comes to astrology, on one level, I think it needs to be really treated as a sacred subject, realizing what its limitations are and what its values are, but also realize that there are things above and beyond and also below astrology, such as above and beyond would be yoga practice, learning to focus your attention so that you can withdraw from any of these distractions that astrology deals with until you experience clarity of awareness, or the things that you might consider to be below astrology, which are, you don't have enough money. Do you need to go talk to an astrologer about that? No, you need to get a job. And for example, Yogananda, he had said, if he did not have a job and he needed one and he needed money, he would move heaven and earth to find a job so that he could take care of his resources, so he could follow his artha path to support his dharma and his moksha. He didn't say, if I don't have enough money or if I don't have a job, I'm going to go talk to an astrologer and have that astrologer tell me well, it's your Mercury debilitated in the 8th house causing this problem.
Well, Yogananda did burn his own chart, so.
Right. That's true. That's true.
Yeah. But Yogananda also said, like, before the spiritual work, the psychological work is important, and astrology is one of the tools that we can use for psychological exploration, right? Do you think, like, that can be done, like, in a right or a wrong way? Like, are dangers to that, or?
Yeah, and I think it really comes down to maybe the quality and the experience of the astrologer. Because, for example, we have a lot of astrologers who get into astrology and they end up doing work of a psychological nature, but they have absolutely no training in counseling or psychology. And so they can work with an individual. And I just had one student / client, we're finishing up a class on the mathematical aspects of yogas and the apprenticeship course. But she wrote to me and she said, look, I've gone to 2 astrologers previously, and they both mentioned this difficult yoga in my chart, a named yoga. And she said, and when you did the reading, because I did one for her as well, you didn't mention that at all. And
what's wrong with you?
Right. Well, no, it was okay. It was okay. Because the first 2 people mentioned this yoga, which was not true for her. But they both mentioned it, and all they did was they would say, okay, oh wow, you've got this really difficult yoga, good luck with that. And then they just quit.
They didn't say anything about it.
No. And they both stopped at that. So, I saw that she had this yoga because it's a pretty obvious yoga, but I didn't say anything about it because when you look at the rest of the chart, you get a sense of who the person is and where that yoga fits in their experience. And so what we have to be aware of is that when we're doing astrology for the kind of purpose to help a person learn and grow, and we see a difficult yoga, and we know what the indications are, like, for example, Rahu and Saturn with the 4th lord or something like that. I think that's the yoga. Yeah, exactly. Well, that means something. But if we just say, oh, you're going to be a hypocrite and a deceitful person and a liar, and then you just leave it at that, well, that's kind of an issue, because if the person is not that way at all because of other things within their chart, then they're going to be scratching their head and thinking, gee, that's terrible. And because astrologers are in a position of power, and they're supposed to be helpful in that regard. So what I recommend, and I discussed this in the class, was what you need to do is talk people through those kinds of things. Meaning you would say, oh, well, you've got Rahu and Saturn with the 4th lord aspected by Mundi and a malefic planet, whatever it might be. So this means that you might be a bit sensitive about an area of your life, and so you hide it. And so you don't feel comfortable about sharing these sort of things. Because you can be what you call deceitful, because maybe you have a sexual preference that's not accepted by your society. And you have to be that way to protect yourself, or whatever it might be. Or maybe you live in the southern part of the United States and you're an astrologer. That's something that you hide from the world. So anyway, what I'm trying to get at here is that I think for astrologers that it's very helpful if they don't just simply make a judgment, leave it at that, and move on, because that can be harmful to a person. If they can look at the principles behind the yogas or the combination and say, let's talk this through and see how you've actually worked with it. See how it's actually playing out in your life. That astrologer will get more and better information about the individual, confirmed through the chart, and the person will have their life validated, and they will be able to see, here are the river of confluence, which makes me feel this way. And so now I understand why I have such difficulties that I do, and that really it might not be a big issue. It might just be something that's part of who I am and how I relate to my society or my culture. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, and like the way you were saying, Kavata Yoga, you'll be a hypocrite, those ancient texts have very definitive, like, your wife will die, you're gonna be a hypocrite. Right. So it's not really like that. Like, you have to, like, adapt it to, I don't know, maybe that something is lost in translation, but also, like, you have to realize it's not like such a tragic thing, right?
Well, there's a few other things about that as well. One of them is that the problem that occurred, I think, is that a lot of things were written down in these verses or these sutra type formats, and it was something like you just said, if you've got this planet here, your wife will die, or whatever it might be. And they were put into books with these long lists of the sun in Scorpio means this, the sun in the fifth house means this. And what most people did is they took that meaning and they said, oh, well, it must be true. They didn't realize that those books were simply trying to write out the general energy and quality of that potential so that the astrologer could contemplate it, think about it, and see how it might actually apply to the real person that you're talking about, or you're talking to.
So they would be still like sutras, not like absolute axioms, truths, right? So they would be like guidelines, or like some, I don't know.
Exactly. They're guidelines to give you a way to think about how the chart's set up. Just like Sarvarta Chintamani is a wonderful example of that.
Mm-hmm.
There's planets and houses that talks about this planet ruling this Navamsha exalted in this malefic Navamsha Lord, whatever it might be. And what that's doing is it's giving us examples of principles about how to read a chart. And yes, we can follow that verbatim, but how often are you going to see that exact thing showing up? The point is to get you thinking about, okay, I understand how this principle works. Now let's see, do I see anything similar based on these principles? So they're teaching guidelines for the astrologer to contemplate. So that's one part of this whole thing. Number two is a lot of people look at yogas and they'll say, you've got the Kapata yoga. Terrible. But what they don't do, there's a way to judge a yoga.
Yeah.
You look at the combination of the Ishta and Kashta, the Shubha and Ashubha score.
You look the ascendant.
And you tie it all together and you do the math, and it'll say, okay, this person has 7.8 points of positivity towards this yoga, and maybe 0.7 points of negativity towards this yoga. So if you see the Kapata yoga, and the planets causing that have a high yoga judgment score, are you going to talk about the negativity of it? Probably not. You would have to have a high negative number there to get into it. And of course, you have to look at the rest of the chart to see if it's supported in that regard. So the issue with things like yogas are essentially they are guidelines, but you have to learn to see where they fit into the chart and how to assess them mathematically. That way, when you talk to a person, you're not just spouting off stuff which may or may not be true and potentially harming them, which does what? Causes more karmic problems.
Yeah, for the astrologer as well, I guess.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so what do you think the role of intuition is in astrology? Because we talked about like yogas and quantifying them mathematically in order to assess a good judgment. What do you think intuition weighs in this?
I think intuition helps protect an astrologer from making mistakes. So, but the trouble with intuition is that it can be very fickle.
True.
So you see, that's why learning the principles and the mathematics of it, even if your intuition's not working, you can at least look at it and say, well, everything's pointing this direction based on my assessment. So therefore, intuition or not, I can see that this is probably going to be the case. So intuition works very well when you are doing more of like a psychic type of reading, whereas astrology becomes a gateway, a key that opens the mind so that you can get the information. Because you can do that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But again, the problem is that if an individual has not spent time, for example, one extremely helpful yogic practice, which would help all astrologers if they're really interested in astrology and not just being famous, but if they would help all astrologers, the yogic practice in the yamas and niyamas of practicing the truth. And why is that the case? Because when you practice the truth all the time, you learn to feel what truth feels like. Think about it. When you're telling a lie, or when you're sort of fudging the truth a little bit to someone, that kind of feels wrong, right? Like, you know what I'm talking about. And so if you're looking at a chart and you're getting ready to say something that's not true, and you've been practicing the truth for years, you'll get that same kind of like, I don't think so. And so if you trust that and you pull back and you don't say it, well, then in a sense, that's helping to develop your intuition, but it's not about intuition in that sense. It's simply about becoming as close to expressing truth is possible. And then all you got to do, you don't even need astrology to do that. You can simply hold in your mind possible probabilities. Like if someone asks you a question like, am I going to be successful with this business venture in the next 6 months? Sure, you can look at their chart, but if you practice the truth, you can simply, in your mind, pretend like you're going to say, yeah, you're going to do fantastic. And if you get that kind of like untruthful feeling, you know that it's not true. But if you say, nope, it's going to be a total bomb, and that feels like, yep, that's the truth, then you say it, and it will usually be accurate. So in a way, intuition plays an extremely good role when you don't know a lot of the techniques, or if you're just genuinely psychic. But intuition can be fickle. And beyond intuition, one of the best practices for an astrologer is simply doing one's best to practice the truth, because then no matter what you're going to say to the other person, chart or not, even if that chart has Jupiter and Mars and the moon in a wonderful Raj Yoga in the 9th or 10th house, if you're about ready to say you're going to be a wonderful world-renowned teacher, and you get that, well, then you know that it's not true, and so you don't say it, and then you will be accurate, which is hopefully the goal of astrology.
Sometimes I get the even without looking at the chart, because I see the person asking, okay, I've been to 10 astrologers and they said, and now I want to know this prediction about these 5 things.
Right. Well, exactly. And it can even be as simple as, when they email you and they ask you a question from the email, you don't even have to type in their chart yet, and you can just contemplate that question. And what you'll find is, I'm sure you've experienced this, that as soon as you create their chart, it is obvious that it is not true, or it is true. It can go either way. Yeah. So part of the astrologer's role, we have to remember that astrology was really reserved often for the what they call the priestly caste, or the priestly class. And what's the role of a priest? It's not to simply predict things all day long. It's to help a person understand and feel the truth of their life. And so if someone comes to you and they say, am I going to be wildly successful with a business in 6 months? And you get the feeling of no. Well, it doesn't mean that you just simply say, no, that's it, get out of here. It could be, because maybe that's what they need to hear. But it could be that you say, no, I don't think so. So we need to reassess what you're doing, because that's the beauty of even like Progeny astrology. I know you do a lot of Progeny astrology too.
Yeah. I did one yesterday that was so awesome. It was like, I felt it, and I don't know, it was just the best Progeny ever.
Progeny is always fantastic. It's always that feeling that you're talking about. And why is that the case? Because you are so tuned in to that question in the moment. And what's happening there is that it's almost like there's this force going this way, and it's a particular kind of force. And right at this moment, right where the force intersects here, they ask the question. And so by hitting at that moment, sort of, now, is that force going down? Is it going up, based on the question? And so you can say, no, it's going down. It's not working very well. So then we have to remember, though, just like we talked about free will and whatnot, that it's based on a previous force coming in, which means that if you're going to say no, and that's it, fine. But as you study astrology, you might be able to say, no, it's not. So you need to start doing something different than what you're doing now, which is why when people ask Prajna questions, if they come back 3 weeks later and say, okay, how about now?
It's not okay.
And they haven't done anything different. If they haven't done anything different in their life, I've got to say, this has happened to me so many times. They've not changed their direction. They've not thought about a different plan of attack. They just keep doing the same old thing. Almost always, the chart, when I look at it, has 80% of the time similar aspects, similar planetary placements pointing to the same answer that I got 3 weeks ago. But if a person hears what you say and say, no, it's not going to be successful, and then they stop and they say, okay, how can I come at this from a different angle? How can I change my direction? Almost always the prajna will be different. So this brings us back to this idea that there is a river of influence flowing through life. And as long as we stay on that one particular course, we're going to keep going in that direction. But we've got the capacity to say, no, let's take it over here a little bit and see what happens when we go down this way. So that's what astrology can help us see. But again, this all relates to our experiences in this world. So our individualized, you're Carmina, I'm Ryan life. This is not necessarily related to the bigger absolute picture of things. This is simply about who we think we are as a little person.
Yeah.
Right. Which is okay. I mean, that's part of life too.
Yeah. Yeah, with Prashna, it's so amazing that like it's amazing if you can do the question just when you get it. Because yesterday I was doing something else and I got this email and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna stop everything. I'm gonna do this right now, and it was the best ever. It's like I feel like I'm a medium, and like this is
Right.
not me doing it. It's just like I'm translating this for you, this message,
Right.
because you have the merit. So it
Exactly.
was like,
And that's a very good point. What you just said is that there's a few things. We talked about truth, but the other aspect of it is faith. So what's the problem sometimes with astrology is people write to you and they want their question answered right now. And so what you can do is if everything's going wonky in your life, you think, no, but I've really got to answer this question. And you sit down and you do it and you're forcing it.
yeah,
You don't always give the right information. And I've seen this true in my life. It's sort of a blessing and a curse of being a somewhat well-known astrologer is that I get a lot of emails. And I have a lot of people wanting sessions or prajnas. And sometimes someone will send me a prajna 3 weeks ago, and I don't get to it until 21 days later.
yeah,
But what I found fascinating is that when I decided to simply trust that I will answer that prajna when it is the right time, that was when the prajna responses became extremely accurate. And the other fascinating thing, I know I might have talked about this with Nicole and Corey when we were out at Ernst's on that video we did. But what I have found is that there may be times when I won't have looked at my email for a couple weeks because I've been busy with other things. And then I decide I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do all of my prajnas, say, today. And I will have had a prajna sent to me 4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, but I decide I'm going to do them all right now. And what I always find happening is that the questions that each of those 4 people sent to me that have been sent at different times, different weeks, I mean, sometimes weeks in between, they all are asking the same question.
wow.
It's all about my relationship problem or a business or a health related thing. So what I find is that people get their responses when it is appropriate to get their responses. So one thing's, and this is not to make an excuse for lazy astrologers who just don't want to answer your questions. But sometimes astrologers can't get to them immediately. And if both the astrologer and the client can trust, the answer will come when it's required to come. If they can trust that, they will get a much, much, much better astrological response. But again,
Yeah,
this is not an excuse
yeah.
for astrologers who are just like, don't bother me. I'll get to it when I get to it. I'm not talking about that.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And so you think that thing that you get to the emails exactly when you have to, that you being in line with the truth, like being at a conference with the truth of things, or intuition, or just inspiration?
Yeah, well, inspiration follows it, but I'm always going to lean more towards this concept of truth. And again,
Mm-hmm.
I don't mean like the hard truth of life that the sort of like dogmas that you have to follow.
Yeah,
I just simply mean that resonance where what is good what is helpful, good information or accurate information can come through, or when it is the right time to do something. And that's one of the things that you learn as an astrologer, and that's probably one of the best things of being an astrologer, if you pay attention, is that it becomes extremely clear that there is a more supportive time to do something and there's a time to not do something.
mm-hmm.
Like those moments where you've been really thinking about how you need to work on something in your relationship, and you decide that you're going to wait until Rahu and Mars is on the ascendant, and you don't think about that, but you get this sort of aggressive energy. You think, we're going to talk about it right now. That is not the time to do that. Whereas an astrologer would start to feel that kind of aggression and frustration and say, wait a minute, maybe this isn't the time. They go look and say, oh, look, Rahu and Mars is on the ascendant. Not a good time to go talk to my wife. But then they wait until they're more peaceful and calm. And they say, oh, look, now's the time I want to go talk to her. And they happen to do a chart and they see Jupiter and Moon is in the ninth house or whatever it might be. So yeah, that makes perfect sense. So it's all about, I think, just while we are here in this form and with this personality, living as in harmony as we can based on what we want to achieve. Like if I want to go fight someone, maybe I do want Rahu and Mars on the ascendant.
Yeah.
And that would be the right time to do it. But it's all got to come down to that. And when we can admit that to ourselves, that's where real surrender comes into play, because then we have to let go of this. I'm going to do it right now because this is what I want to do. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you don't want to go try to catch a wave when there's no waves coming.
Yeah.
You want to make sure you're there when the wave is actually happening. So
yeah.
Anyway.
Definitely. And since you mentioned this, like timing, do you think Muhurta or like electional astrology is useful, or should you just like follow your inspiration, or I don't know? Do you still do that? Do you still look for times?
There are some aspects to that. And number one, personally, when I think of practicing astrology, my thought is, in a sense, and this is just personal here, is that the best types of astrology to do are Progeny astrology and Muhurta.
Mm-hmm.
Because the reason I think this is true is because with Progeny astrology, you are maybe attempting to do something in life, and maybe it's not working. And so you've tried, though. You've done your best. And so you need to kind of get some more information. So then you go to an astrologer, and in that moment, you get the information to help guide you to go in the direction you need to go. So that's good, because it's showing that you are playing your role as an active part of this individualized infinite consciousness, and you're not just simply throwing away your divine will to fate. Okay, so you're trying. And Muhurta is also important, I think, because personally I think that Muhurta was probably the original Vedic astrology.
Yeah.
Because people, I don't think I wasn't, well, maybe I was there, but I don't remember. People, I don't think, were so caught up in their personality. I'm in pain, tell me why. I think they were a part of nature, and they saw the sun and the moon rise, and they saw the stars, and they planted crops, and they interacted with the natural world. And their question wasn't me. It was, okay, well, life wants to move in this way. So when can I plant my crops for greatest success? When can I start my marriage for greatest happiness? When can I do this medical treatment or health treatment for greatest success? And
or
so
when can I die after the war in Kukushetra?
Right, exactly. so they would use that Muhurta to stay in harmony with what was actually going on, what I call in the rest of you, because there's the little you, but then there's the rest of you, which everything is a part of. And so I think the Muhurta is extremely important in that way. If you have a divine inspiration, and by divine inspiration, I don't mean some lofty thing that is earth-shattering. I just simply mean maybe your divine inspiration is, I want to make a beautiful meal for my friends, because that's beautiful too. So when would be a good time to invite them over, pick a Muhurta, so that it goes as beautiful as I think it should. So yes, I definitely, if I had my choice, which I do, so I'm trying this, I would only truly do Muhurta and Prajna, and that would be it. Because in a way, that's keeping people engaged in life, and it's not trying to distract them by getting overly caught up in all their little psychological complexes. Because the more attention you put on those psychological complexes, sometimes the worse they get.
yeah.
So,
because you tend to think about that,
right,
and like a snowball.
Right. If you're unhappy in your relationships, you don't need an astrologer to tell you that.
Yeah.
You need to read a book on how to have a good relationship. You need to find someone who does have a good relationship and say, hey, you've been married for 25 years. What did you do to be happy? And model your life after that. What most people do is they want to go to an astrologer. They want to keep doing what they've been doing, which has caused problems in the first place, and then have it work out.
Yeah, with some seal of approval, like I pay this money, so I'm gonna keep doing it, and it's gonna be, I don't know.
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
how that works. Yeah, yeah, I really like what you said about Prashna and Muhurta. I also think like they're very valuable, and I mean, I think it's very satisfying to help people this way. And also what you were saying about telling people what they should do, not just telling them the situation and that's it. Bye. Like, sometimes I do card readings, and there's this card reading called Light on a Star, and you have the should do card. So it's like a prashna, like what's going to happen, what
Mhm.
works for you, against you, and the should do card. I think that's so important. Like,
Right.
that's the key to the whole reading.
Hmm.
Well, thank you very much for your time. I'm going to let you go now because I know you have a lot to do. But thank you very much for being here and talking about
Yeah.
this topic. And if you want to add something, or if you want to tell people about something that you're organizing or something like that, go ahead.
Okay. Well, number one, I appreciate you asking me to do this. I know that well, who knows? I've had negative responses to my opinions on these things before, and that's just how it goes. So we'll see. But I thank you for having me to talk about these things. As far as what's going on, there isn't too much. I am focusing on a Kriya Yoga apprenticeship course, which has already begun, and an astrology apprenticeship course, which again has already begun, and that doesn't the application process doesn't begin again for another year, so we're a little bit beyond that. The only other thing I would say is that on the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Ryan's Vedic Astrology, I am doing a series of talks on what does each planet mean for an individual ascendant. And I think we're on number like 11 of 86. But again, the goal of that, in my mind, is to show people what a general blueprint of an ascendant would look like. And if we were just naturally living in harmony with that blueprint of that particular ascendant based on the planets, what that would be like, to encourage them to do so.
Mhm.
So my channel, I'm trying to get it more towards this idea of figuring out, based on the planets, what might be the clearest or the more conscious expression of that planet, and how can we simply start living like that now, rather than having you go to an astrologer and the astrologer just tells you how bad it is and that's it. Now,
Yeah.
I know there are plenty of good astrologers out
Take
there.
this gem and go.
Yeah, but a lot of people write to me, and that's why I'm doing this. A lot of people write to me and they say, this astrologer said this and that was it, and it's kind of heartbreaking a little bit, but
Yeah.
we're making progress, and there are more and more.
I'm poor and miserable now.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, they told me to get a $10,000 sapphire
Ruby.
for my money problems, and now I don't have any money. But anyway,
And I think you were also doing something on the 27th.
what's
Uh,
that again?
I think you were also teaching a class on the 27th. You were teaching something.
Oh, right. Yes. So on January 27th, I am working with the Long Island NCGR chapter to discuss Rahu and Ketu, and understanding, again, how to work with them based on Rahu and Ketu with a planet, how to, again, embody the highest qualities of that planet, and also Rahu and Ketu's position within various houses and signs, to give us a sense of, all right, now that we know this, how can we work with that highest energy of that planet? So that's a 3 or 4 hour webinar that we're doing. So yeah, that's something that people could participate in if they're interested.
Okay, cool. So thank you very much again for coming.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, I'll see you everyone. Bye.
Okay, take care.
Um,